In a few days, it's going to be league start. People will get baited from guides, and others will no-life the game for 20 hours in front of the screen to be able to get ahead of other players. Today, I'm going to be talking about the league start guide for bow builds. The goal here is going to be to have the smoothest league start. That means it's going to be strong, it's going to have good quality of life, and good enough survivability. This will not be for, speedrunners and stuff. It's just going to be the average player who's going to play and wishes to do a league start as a bow. The part 1 video that I made for last league as a Raider Reign of Arrow is still 100% viable. However, this video will be going through the overall, I've made a few changes on the way you level as well. I have incorporated a Manaforged setup so that you do not have to use the totems, because I know a lot of players do not like totems. So the video is going to be an overview of what you will have to do. I'll be explaining a few key important things that I found that players didn't really understand in the beginning, and then I will have a POB for you to be able to follow, the progression. It'll all be in the POB. So the video is going to be talking about what makes a good league starter and why we will choose our league starter. I will be then explaining the key mechanics of your league starter, and then the main progression points I think are quite important. So now, what makes a good league starter? Choosing a league starter can be very impactful on the overall progression of your league, right? Good league starter are builds that can perform very well with pretty much no gear, right? Or that need the least amount of specific items, right? So a league starter that requires a unique is a bad league starter, because that unique might not drop for you, it might not drop for other players, you might not have enough currency for it, right? So that would be a very bad league starter. To test usually the overall power of a league starter, players will often play it in solo self-found, which is a mod where there is no trade, so it's only you. And if it does very well and you have a good time on solo self-found, that means in trade, obviously you will have a good time. So in this video and in the POB, the build is going to be 100% solo self-found viable, and you can get to red tier maps without having to trade a single item. However, the thing is with league starter is they're often going to be only good for league start, right? They're fairly easy to make. They get strong very easily, right? They don't need a lot to be powerful. But when you reach true endgame, Uber content, delirium map, juicing maps, they're often not going to be the best, and they're not going to be able to scale with more currency, right? So some of them, they'll stop being good at maybe 50 divine, and even if you invest more, the returns are not going to be worth it. So that means most players will actually have to make a second build, right? So either they respec their character or they make a completely new character, which will be after that their main build in the league. So now, why would you follow my league starter? Well, first of all, because it's good and it works well. It's been tested. Some speedrunners were able to get to Exarch and Eater of World. Both of them killed in 5 hours. Obviously, we're not pro players, but it just proves that if speedrunners do use the skill, that means it's quite good, because they don't need to break their head, and it's still going to be powerful with pretty much nothing. Bow builds in general have actually been getting stronger and stronger, especially in the early game, and so much that they've actually been a good league starter for a while now, compared to a few years back where you needed like hundreds of X, which are like divines now, to make them work. So basically you can make them work with pretty much nothing. And another good reason for the league start, which is I think the best, is that it's actually just the normal progression to get for endgame bow builds, right? As we said, league starters are often going to be bad once you reach true endgame, as they don't scale with currency. However, when you league start as a bow build, so Reign of Arrow, Lightning Arrow, you can easily swap the Tornado Shot, which is going to be usually the end game skill of bow builds. Why? Because Tornado Shot is the best bow build in the game because of its extreme mapping capabilities and single target damage. And you pretty much you don't have to respec your character actually. The only time you're going to respec your character is when you're going to do the crit swap, which I'm going to explain a bit later. So no need to lose your time making a new character or spending currency to respec. Your character is already going to be done for you. Now this is going to be the smoothest experience for, you know, hardcore player. When I mean hardcore, I don't mean like in the hardcore mode, but like, you know, players that really want to play a lot the game, or for, you know, casual type of player, this is going to be the best for you guys. Now, for the question of hardcore, should you use that in hardcore? Absolutely not. Do never use this build in hardcore. You're going to have the worst experience of your life. Yeah. So what will we actually league start? We're going to league start as a ranger, and we're going to be using Rain of Arrows and then swap to Lightning Arrow actually earlier than usual. Usually what you're going to do is you're going to run Rain of Arrows all the way till the end of the axe and a bit in the maps, and then swap to Lightning Arrow. However, this time we will go for Lightning Arrow around Act 7 when you do your labs. So what variant are we going to run? The more popular type of setup that I've seen right now is going to be the Trinity Manaforged setup with the most minimal usage of totems. And well, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and make a small guide on that. Our end goal will be Tornado Shot. However, we will not swap Tornado Shot by the end of, you know, our Act Rush and leveling, because Tornado Shot is going to require a bit more resources and a bit more power to actually swap to actually feel better than Lightning Arrow. So our goal here is going to be to reach tier 16 maps so we can go get into mapping in legions, right? When you're a bow player, usually the way you're going to make your currency is actually by mapping, because you map very well, very quickly. The goal is to have the most amount of like raw drops. Because the economy is fresh, nobody has items. Like, yes, you can make a lot of currency by trading and stuff, but you still need items and currency to actually drop from the game. And that's why a lot of players, what they do is they go Lightning Arrow as quickly as possible, and then they no life, you know, Legion mapping and stuff, so that they make a ton of currency early on. They can then switch to Magic Find or for something else. And Magic Find, by the way, this league is going to seem to be completely busted, and there's going to be guides coming in for that. So the progression overview, we're going to go for a Galvanic Arrow for clear and Burning Arrow for single target. Then we're going to use totems to boost our single target just for a bit. We're then going to swap to Rain of Arrow as a main skill. And for our single target, we will then stop using totems and we will go for a Manaforged setup with Storm Rain and Blast Rain. Once we hit a bit further in the axe, we will go then Lightning Arrow with Returning Projectile for very nice clear. And then for our leveling, we will be using a non-crit tree and use the Deadeye Ascendancy, and then we will swap to a crit tree. I'll explain all of that later in the video. So first of all, why do we go Galvanic Arrow, and what is that? That Galvanic Arrow is basically going to be the before starter skill. So our starter skill is going to be Rain of Arrows, but we need a skill to use. Well, we're going to have to use a skill before we get to Rain of Arrows. What's good about Galvanic Arrow? Well, first of all, it gives a lot of at level 4, it gives pretty much, well, at level 2, I think, yeah. It gives pretty much a lot of flat damage. As well, it gives you 2 additional projectiles, which is very good, right? Because you don't need gem supports to give you additional arrows. You have 3 arrows when you shoot. However, it's going to be, you know, kind of it has a short range, right? So you will need to be a bit closer to the enemies, which means for very noob players, you might die a bit more. And if you have difficulty using Galvanic Arrow, I actually like using Split Arrow. Why? Because you have additional arrows and you can shoot enemies from very far away without putting yourself in danger. So whichever you choose, you will use both of them until level 12, and then once you hit level 12, you will swap to our leveling skill, Rain of Arrows. Rain of Arrows is going to be one of our main leveling skills for half our progression in the axe. It's often going to be used. Why? Because it has multiple arrows, first of all, and like as you can see, at level 1, it shoots 17 arrows. And it also shoots the arrows from the air all the way down. So it doesn't shoot it doesn't go from your character to the enemy. It's the character, he shoots arrows in the air, and then it's gonna fall from the sky. What's so good about that is, example, there's a huge pack. You don't need Pierce to be able to hit every single enemy, right? If you shot from your character, example, you used Lightning Arrow, you would have to fire your projectile. It would have to pierce the enemies or have to shotgun, because Lightning Arrow has shotgun capabilities. But Rain of Arrow is really good because you don't need extra arrows and you don't need pierce support, which means you can save a lot on gem links. And we will be using it the moment we reach level 12. As you can see, it requires a level 12, so you use it. And we will go for the Trinity setup with Mirage Archer. This is going to be the best one. I will be explaining what Trinity setup is later on, don't worry about it. Lightning Arrow. Lightning Arrow is going to be the second progression skill before Tornado Shot. And what's important to note is that Lightning Arrow is actually a single arrow skill, right? So when you have Lightning Arrow with nothing on, when you shoot it, it only fires a single projectile. This means we will actually need additional arrows for it to be good. As well, I think that Pierce and returning projectile makes it better. Without it, I don't think it's worth it. So once we reach part 2 and we get into our lab, you know, we get our second and third lab, then I suggest going for Lightning Arrow. Because of the conversion, you make sure to at least have another elemental damage in an abundance to be able to proc Trinity. As you can see, half of our physical damage is going to be lightning, and then we have a lot of flat added lightning. So make sure to at least be doing quite a bit of fire or quite a bit of cold to be able to proc the full Trinity. But what's so good about Lightning Arrow? Well, Lightning Arrow is OP because it shotgun mob packs, right? So it can target it can target, how much is it? It can target 3. Yeah, it can target 3 other enemies who are in a range of 18, and it will fire lightning bolts from the sky down, which means a single arrow can actually shoot 3 enemies. And you can go up to 5 with the quality now that they changed the quality, but because we're in the axe, we won't have as much quality. But once you reach the maps and you have a lot of gem cutter prism, I suggest getting that quality up, as it will help for map clear. Now, returning projectile is going to be the best support gem you can get, and Lightning Arrow will be then the main skill we use for the best clear, and we will actually even continue using it as our main skill even when we reach, you know, red tier map. Why? Because I still think it's going to be a better option than Tornado Shot. But then once you have, you know, the budget, you know, a couple of divines, maybe 2 or 3, depending on how early it is in the league, or, you know, a bit later in the league, maybe 5, going Tornado Shot then will be, you know, well, it's the main goal, it's the main progression, and it's going to feel a lot better once you put a bit more currency. So, Tornado Shot. Tornado Shot is the best bow skill in the game. Crazy clearing speed, single target DPS is wild, especially with the shotgun with the secondary projectile. However, what you need to understand is Tornado Shot is basically the basic attack. It has no flat damage, it has no conversion, it's just the basic attack, but at the end, it does a small tornado and does 3 secondary projectile, right? So, in the beginning, you might think that's kind of bad, and for bad gear, Tornado Shot is bad because it gives nothing. It's literally just, as I said, the basic attack. However, the fact that it has no conversion or no flat damage makes it very versatile, and you can use it in pretty much any bow build once you have the budget. However, on the league start, I really suggest you stick to Lightning Arrow until you have a few divines, and even with a few divines, sometimes Lightning Arrow will be a better option. But then again, I will be making a new video once league is started, and once we have a lot more information on the 3.23, then I will be making a video on Tornado Shot on a lower budget. So Manaforged Arrow. Manaforged Arrow, you've heard of it, and it's going to be the new setup where a lot of players are going to be using during their league start. So Manaforged Arrow will actually be what replaces our totem. Rain of Arrows and Lightning Arrow are 2 very good skill. However, they have few limitations in the single target area because they completely suck ass. Like they're so bad at single target. So to answer this, a lot of people actually use totems, right? So ballistas for tankier and harder enemies. You know, juiced up rares, bosses, or, you know, when you're in the act progression and you don't have a lot of damage against like rare map packs or magic map packs, you drop your ballistas and it'll kill them. So what does Manaforged do, and how does it work? Well, once we spend 300% of the total mana cost of the skill that is supported by Manaforged, it will trigger that skill automatically. So for example, Manaforged is linked to Burning Arrow, and it costs 5 mana. You would have to spend 15 mana on other bow skills such as ballistas or your main skill. We're not going to be using ballistas, but ballistas do work as well. So for example, you spend 15 mana on your Rain of Arrows, it will then trigger the Burning Arrow because you spent 300% of the Burning Arrow cost. What's really cool about this is, first of all, it triggers the skill gem, which means it's no animation and instant. And the second advantage is you're simply going to be attacking, and then when you're attacking, it's going to give you you're also going to trigger an additional skill, which is like, you know, free DPS at all times. we will be using something called life tap support. And what's cool about life tap support is it makes the Manaforged Arrow cost life instead of mana, which means every time you attack, I don't know why exactly, but every time you're going to attack, it's going to automatically trigger Manaforge without having you to spend 300% of the mana cost. So for example, your Burning Arrow is 5 mana and your Rain of Arrow is 5 mana, and you shoot Rain of Arrow, you would have to shoot Rain of Arrow 3 times before being able to trigger the Manaforge. However, with Life Tap, the 3 times you're going to attack, it's going to trigger all 3 times the Manaforged Arrow. However, it is important to note that there is a base cooldown on the Manaforged Arrow, but in the early game, your attack speed is not that much higher. We will be using Storm Rain and Blast Rain as our Manaforged Arrow setup, as they provide a ton of single target DPS. So you will be shooting Rain of Arrow as your clear speed, and against bosses you will be shooting Rain of Arrows, but by shooting Rain of Arrows it will also trigger Storm Rain and Blast Rain to hit the enemies and have awesome single target DPS, and you won't have to drop any totems for that. But then why do we drop totems, and are they even better, right? The totems are going to be the best single target damage you have before Tornado Shot. What's good about totems is, first of all, you have 100% damage uptime. What does that mean? So you will drop your totems and you will attack, right? But sometimes you're going to have to dodge. You're going to have to, put yourself in a different area of the screen. You don't have time. Well, what's good about totems is they won't stop attacking even if you stop attacking, which means you always have damage. However, that doesn't work when you use Focus Ballistas, but I don't suggest using Focus Ballistas in the early game. But yeah, so 100% damage uptime is a very good advantage of totems. As well, totems are also going to need less gems sockets going, right? Because with the Manaforged Arrow, you're going to need the Manaforged Arrow, which is a support, and then you're going to be using Life Tap, which is another. So basically, 2 gems you're using is only to be able to make your Manaforged Arrow work. For totems, once you reach level 28 and you use artillery totems, it's basically just a single gem and it just works by itself. So that's a very good advantage of totem as well. So if you're short in sockets, totems might be a better option. However, they do have a limited duration and they will need to be redeployed, right? Which is mana, and also people just don't like people don't like totems or ballistas. And it's a video game and you're supposed to have fun. So if you don't like the playstyle of a totem, you can completely drop it and use the Manaforged setup. However, the Manaforged setup does not offer the 100% damage uptime, as you do need to shoot, but it does have a lot of quality of life and a smoother feel to the build, right? As you don't need to drop totems, it's actually going to auto aim for you. The Manaforged is going to shoot the enemies automatically. And so yeah, so Manaforged is very good quality of life. Totem is going to be, if you have problems with sockets. And in terms of damage, in the early game, I think totems completely beat the Manaforged Arrow. I know a lot of speedrunners and a lot of people are saying Manaforged feels good as equally good as totems, but I think before part 1, it is completely untrue, especially if you're not a really skilled player. But once you reach part 2, you can totally swap the Manaforged Arrow and feel the same thing as totems. So basically that was what I think. So I think you should keep the totems until Act 6 and then swap to Manaforged. However, you can completely swap to Manaforged the moment you are able to get Manaforged, which is I think in Act 1. You can totally do that and you will still have a good experience. I just think it won't be as much as a smooth experience as if you went for totem. So if you do want to swap to Manaforged without rushing it, but without waiting to part 2, I suggest doing it in Act 3 once you have Life Tap support, right? For consistency and for not having mana issues. So now let's talk about Trinity. There was a lot of players that were confused on Trinity, and there is still a lot of players who don't know how the hell that thing works. But it's really important to understand how it works. Why? Because it is literally the strongest supporting gem for any elemental hit builds. Why? Because it gives you more damage and it gives you penetration, which is huge. However, for newbies, it might be hard to understand. So, well, to understand Trinity, you're going to have to understand that Trinity has a mechanic called Resonance, okay? Resonance is useless except if you have Trinity, and you will only have Resonance once you use Trinity. So, you can have 25 Resonance of each type of elements, and the 3 types of elements are going to be fire, cold, and lightning. You will see an icon on the corner of your screen. It's going to be a circle. And basically, when you have fully proc Trinity, you're going to see that circle have a third in white, a third in blue, and a third in fire. That means you have resonance, right? The red one is going to be fire resonance, the white one is going to be lightning resonance, and then the blue one is going to be cold resonance, right? And what's going to happen is when you attack, let's say you do fire and cold. The highest hit on that attack, let's say it was 50 cold and 25 fire. Well, Trinity is going to trigger the resonance of the two opposite elemental damage type of your highest damage. So example, your highest damage was cold at 50. You will then see your fire and your lightning resonance go up, but your cold is going to be at 0, right? To get the cold one, so the blue, the next attack, or the next few attacks, you must have your highest damage being either lightning or fire. So let's say the first attack was 50 cold and then 20 fire. Your second attack or your third attack, depending, you would need maybe 40 fire and then 30 cold. Then you will be able to proc lightning again, but it was already procced, and then you are able to proc cold, right? So how to proc Trinity in general, you need 2 elemental damage types in attacks, okay? A lot of people think you need all 3 elemental damage types, but no, you could proc Trinity with 2 elements only. Both types of elemental damage must do similar amounts of damage, okay? For example, as you can see here, I do around 30,000 to 65,000 in cold damage, but I do 200 to 5,000 lightning damage. That's not enough, and you will never be able to proc Trinity. As you can see, my highest hit right now was, well, I don't know why it says cold, but whatever. My highest hit is cold, which means I'm only able to proc 2 of the 3 Trinities. 3 of the resonance, sorry, right? And what you need to understand is all damage type, right, deal a minimum and maximum damage. As you can see, my minimum cold damage is 29,000 and my maximum is 65,000. My minimum lightning damage is 200 and my maximum is 5,000. So what you need to make sure is that one of your elemental damage types minimum is not higher than the second elemental damage maximum. As you can see here in this example, my lightning damage, its maximum is 5,000, and my cold damage, the minimum, is 30,000, which means I am not able to proc Trinity. However, on the second example, I deal 6,000 cold damage to 13,000 damage, and then I deal 3,200 damage to 7,000 fire damage, which means my fire damage's maximum damage is higher than my cold damage minimum, and I will be able to proc the full Trinity. However, make sure that your second elemental damage type maximum is a bit higher, or like a lot higher than the minimum, right? Because as you can see here, there's only an 800 damage difference, which means I will need to attack many times before I'm able to proc Trinity. On the second example, I deal 12,000 to 30,000 cold, and then I deal 10,000 to 25,000 lightning damage. This means I will basically procking Trinity very quickly and very easily. And that's how Trinity works. Then again, later on, we're going to go for a non-crit, we will go for a crit tree, but in the beginning, it is better to go for a non-crit tree. So what does non-crit tree mean? This means we will be using something called precise technique. It's a keystone in your tree, and what it gives is it gives you 40% more attack damage if your accuracy rating is higher than your maximum life. However, you will not be able to deal critical strikes. In the beginning, we will not have a lot of critical strike chance and a lot of critical multi, right? As we know, critical strike chance and critical multi, they basically like make your DPS go up by 7, like times 7, because it's huge, it's so powerful. However, in the beginning, it's pretty much impossible to have 100% crit chance or like above even 20%. And our crit multi is not high enough to make it worth critting. So by using the precise technique, although it says 40% more damage, don't forget that we're not critting anymore. So it's basically a 20% more DPS at all times. And we will be using the precise technique up until we do around our 3rd lab. Once you do your 3rd lab, it's not around level 55. I think that was a mistake, sorry. But once you do your 3rd lab, then you swap to crit tree and you will stop using precise technique, right? So a few tips on how to get DPS very early on. As long as you have accuracy higher than your DPS, right? So that's something important. And a lot of players, they have precise technique, but their HP is higher than their accuracy, which is pretty easy to palliate, right? With precision, with War Banner, with some accuracy mastery, you're able to have your accuracy all the time higher than your HP, especially that we're bow builds, so we don't have like a million HP as well. If you need additional accuracy, use a low level precision, or you could use accuracy nodes and accuracy mastery, which is, you know, very good. As well, bow mastery, which increases and reductions to projectile speed, also apply to damage with bow skills. I think that's a very, very powerful, you know, mastery to have in the early game. And those are going to be what you should aim for in the beginning. Now, there are two main ascendancy you should go for, and it's either Raider or Deadeye. For new players, I 100% suggest going Raider. It will be the best option as it gives you zoom, right, so speed, but it also gives you a ton of defense as well as good enough damage. However, you should stick with Rain of Arrows and only go to Lightning Arrow once you have a Deadeye. If you will stay Raider, do not use Lightning Arrow, stick to Rain of Arrows. For those who aren't total newbies, right, so who have, you know, already played bow skills, so if it's your second time, or if you've already played Path of Exile and you kind of know how bow builds work, I do suggest going for Deadeye, which is what I'm going to concentrate a bit more. You will be able to swap Lightning Arrow to Lightning Arrow, quicker, and you will have the zoom and the DPS that we all love from Deadeye. Lightning Arrow is going to be the king in maps in the early game. You're going to see people no-lifing Lightning Arrow, Deadeye, zooming, doing legions, and you will be ripping through them very easily if you know what you're doing. However, it's important to note that your defense might take a small hit, so beware of that. If you go for the Raider Ascendancy, what's really good about that is, first of all, it gives you permanent onslaught and 100% of its effect. So what is onslaught? Onslaught is 20% increased movement speed, 20% increased attack speed, and 20% increase cast speed. We don't care about the cast speed, but when you think about it, you have all the time 20% increase movement speed and 20% increase attack speed. What's also good about that is Avatar of the Chase. So this is the permanent onslaught, and then Avatar of the Chase here gives 100% of the effect of onslaught, which means now you have 40% increased attack speed and 40% movement speed at all times. Quartz Infusion, which is the node right over here, gives you 40% suppression and then permanent phasing. What is phasing? Phasing is you're basically able to walk through enemies without them physically blocking you. That's very good because in the beginning we don't do a lot of damage, right? And we might have you know, swarms of enemies that are like jumping you, right? And if you're in the middle of them and you're not able to dash or like teleport away from them, you'll basically just be imprisoned there and you'll die. What phasing does is you're actually able to just walk like literally through them, and you will never have the problem of being stuck. Finally, Avatar of the Veil, which is right here, gives you a 50% ailment avoidance, which means you won't get shocked, you won't get feared, frozen, chilled, stuff like that, as well as a minus 20% elemental resistance to nearby enemies on a range of 60. And 60 radius is quite big, so pretty much all the enemies that you see on your screen is going to have the minus 20 elemental resistance. So if you do go Raider, I then suggest that you watch my part 1 video, which only talks about Raider and Rain of Arrows. But I do suggest watching this part for the Warden of the Magi, and pretty much that's it. Now for the Deadeye, pretty simple. We're going to go for the Gathering Winds. What does Gathering Wind do? It gives you Tailwind, and Tailwind basically increases your action speed by 8%. So everything you do is 8% quicker. As well, it gives you the possibility to gain Gale Forces, and you can have up to 10 Gale Force. One Gale Force gives you 15% increased effect of Tailwind. So at 10 Gale Force, you have 150% increase of Tailwind, which is a 20% increased action speed. So that's 20% more movement speed. It's not even more, like everything you do is going to be 20% quicker. I then suggest, so that's your first node. I then suggest going for Far Shot, which is going to give you a 60% more damage to enemies that are that are far away, so at a 70 range. And then go for Endless Munition, which is going to give you additional projectiles, and that's going to be very, very strong with Lightning Arrow. And then for Clear, I suggest going for Ricochet, which is going to give you a +1 to chain, and also the possibility of your arrows to bounce from walls, which is nuts for Clear and nuts for shotgun capabilities. I don't suggest going for Focal Point. It's very good for pure DPSers and people who like to do bosses, but you know, for what you're going to use Lightning Arrow for. Focal Point is useless. Now, Warden of the Magi. It's going to be the secondary Ascendancy. It's a new addition in 3.23. If you're watching this video not in 3.23, you can, and it doesn't exist in the main core game, you can just skip this part and it doesn't change anything. But if you're in 3.23, I think this is going to be the best Ascendancy to go for. Why? Because you will be able to use tinctures and have a higher flask effect and higher uptime. So in the early game, it's going to be completely wild. As well, for very, very low level, so when you're doing the axe, it's going to be completely OP, right? Sorry. You will be using, I think the best option is actually use Oath of the Magi. Why? Because, first of all, if you do not have equipped, if you do not have socketed gems in your boots, you actually have a 30% increased movement speed. That's a lot of zoom, and in the early game, 30% increased movement speed is wild. However, you do have to make the sacrifice to not have any gems in your boots. So if you're tight on sockets, I do not suggest going for that. But you could, if you have good boots but not good helmet, you could actually use Oath of the Magi as well to give you a 50% all elemental resistance if you have a helmet that has no sockets. So it's completely broken, to be honest, completely broken. And if you have, if you're not tight on sockets, I suggest going Oath of the Magi. If you are not if you are tight on sockets, you simply don't want to go Oath of the Magi, then I suggest going for Coated Blade, which gives you the possibility to use tinctures. Then go for Nature's Concoction for Nature's Concoction is here. I then suggest going for Nature's Concoction for Flask Uptime and then Flask Effect. Then going for we don't know what Wildwood Blessing will give you, if it's powerful or not. But the fact that it's level 20 and that you're able to get it in the early game, it's probably going to be broken. But we don't know all the information yet, and there are probably going to be hundreds of videos coming out the moment they explain what Wildwood is. But yeah, I suggest going for the tinctures. But if you want to go for Oath of the Magi, I suggest speccing 1 point in there, and then 1 point in Coated Blade, and then 1 in Nature's Concoction. For the defenses, for part 1, you don't really need to spec into any type of defense. Just go for a lot more DPS and prioritize gem links, right? Before fighting the last boss of part 1, I do suggest then going for a bit more elemental resistance because you will be cursed with a minus 30% elemental resistance. Craft resistance on your gear at all times, even before you hit the final boss of part 1. It is pretty easy. Use your crafting bench, get that 18% resistance on pretty much every gear. You have no excuse to not use your crafting bench. Always use your crafting bench to get your defense up. In part 2, if you're not in a rush, try to look for, better items when they're dropping. Especially with that minus 30% curse, it's gonna start being important to have elemental resistance. And before fighting the final boss of part 2, I do suggest having capped elemental resistance, which is pretty easy to do. Just farm a level 65 area and you will have gear dropping like crazy and you'll be able to have your elemental capped. If you're able to get your elemental resistance even above capped, because you will have another negative 30%. However, it is not your, you don't have to kill yourself to have elemental resistance capped, alright? If you have in the 60s or in the 70s, it's okay. But just know that once you're going to go into the maps, if you do not have elemental resistance capped, it is your top priority. Now, evasion is also very good. Evasion is going to be our first layer of defense, and what it basically does is you evade attacks. And what's cool about evading attacks is you basically take no damage. So if you have 50% chance to evade, half the attacks will not hit you. Now, evade does not count for damage over time, and it does not count for spells. To have good evasion, I suggest using a flask, and you will have, if you're using a raider and you have, flasks and stuff, it's going to be pretty easy to get above 50%. But even as a Deadeye, just use, flat evasion flask to be able to, even 30% helps, right? Because 30% of the attacks you just won't get hit. So evasion is, quite of an important layer of defense. Spell suppression. Well, if you do use a point blank stone, sorry, that's for raider only. If you're not a raider, you won't be in front of the enemy's face, but you will still need spell suppression. So spell suppression basically is a chance to mitigate half the damage from spells. So example, somebody deals 1,000 damage and you suppress that spell, so it only works for spell, you'll only take 500 damage, which is OP. With Raider, it's fairly easy to get to 70 or 80%. However, for a Deadeye, you don't have the Ascendancy, which gives you 40%, so it might be a bit hard, and you would have to use some of your tree points to actually get that capped. Now, our main priority is never to cap our spell suppression, especially early on and in early maps. Don't concentrate on that. However, you still want to get that high, and that's pretty easily achievable with a tree. So yeah, just don't forget your spell suppression, because you know, bow builds don't have a lot of defense. So if you're able to have your elemental resistance, quite good enough suppression, and quite good enough evasion, you will be fine. So for your important tree nodes, if you do use Raider, use Quartz Infusion, which will give you a 40% suppression as well as phasing. And also get Graceful Assault. Graceful Assault will give you 60% increased armor, 50% evasion while affected by Onslaught. So Graceful Assault and the 2 points beforehand will give you all of that. And then you can get, you know, more evasion, more spell suppression on your tree. Oh, okay. So now items and sockets. During early progression, the most important thing you want is linked items. They're going to be the top priority. So the most amount of sockets with the most amount of links and the best colors are 100% what is going to decide whether or not we keep an item or not. Therefore, you must prioritize them before anything else, because support gems are going to be the best upgrades for your build. You can literally do the axe with the shittiest gear ever, if done right, and if you have your priorities straight, okay? I was literally able to do the axe with a bow that I found in, like, I think it was part 4, with like 4 links, and it was basically just the bow I smacked. No, it wasn't. Was it a drop? No, I think I just smacked an alchemy or something. But yeah, you can do the whole axe with shitty gear as long as you have good enough sockets and you put crafting upgrades with your bench. Right, so don't be afraid to spend your currency. Currency is actually meant to be spent. So upgrade all of your white items with, you know, your currency, and don't be afraid to use your crafting bench for more resistance, flat damage, or, you know, other useful mod. Right, I do suggest looking at basic guides on crafting. Maybe it can help if you have absolutely no clue how that works. So now for items, what to look for. Basically, on your bow, you want flat damage. And it's more important than any increases in damage. Why? Because there's no point of having increased elemental damage if you don't have any elemental damage, right? So in the beginning, flat damage is going to be way more powerful than increases, right? However, in the axe, beggars can't be choosers, right? So you have a limited choice. You do with what you have. And as I said, links are going to be the most important thing. And then if you're able to get flat damage. Quiver is going to be the same thing as well. For boots, try to get movement speed and resistance. You are able to do a crafting recipe. I don't know if it's still viable, but there's a crafting recipe to always have movement speed on your boots. So you can do that. I think it's when you sell boots with a Quicksilver, but don't quote me on that. And then for the rest of the gear and the rest of the mods, try to get resistance, flat life, and then flat damage. Okay? And as I said, use your crafting bench on all your items and spend your currency. Okay? The faster you get to maps, the faster you're able to farm for actual currency. So the currency that you find in the axe is worth nothing. Now, unless like a mirror drops or a divine drops, obviously don't spend it. But 99.9999% of the currency you have in the axe and in the early maps, just fucking use it, right? Just use it on your gear. You're going to have better gear. Don't be afraid to spend your currency. Now, how to do the axe, basically just follow the quests, and basically that's it, right? However, knowing where to go and what to do is going to be the best thing if you wish to have the better league start, because the quicker you get to the map, you're ahead of other players, you're able to get your currency going, you're able to get your strats going a lot quicker. So it's important to know the layouts and what to do, as well as, you know, knowing chaos recipes. So that's why I suggest, if you want to watch video guides on how to do the axe. And I think the best guides on that is somebody named Fusion. He made a guide on all 10 acts, step by step, every single area, where to go and how to do them as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So it's not a speed run. You can watch those videos at the same time as doing your acts. It's pretty chill. The videos are going to be linked down in the description. He did an awesome job doing so. For completely new players, example, if it's your first time, what I do suggest is actually just have fun and take it in. because the first time you do the axe, you're going to spend a lot of time in them, and it's basically, well, it's probably going to be the last time you'll ever want to do them willfully. And it's going to be the last time, it's going to be the first and last time you spend that much time in them. Most players now just spend, you know, 5 hours max in the axe, and they just like skip everything that they don't need to do. So take it in if you're a new player and if it's your first time doing the axe. Now the next session is going to be main points of leveling. If you know what to do, or if you just want to watch the POB, you can like, well, completely not watch this part. But this is just going to be what I think is going to be important parts of your leveling. Yeah, no, we don't need that. Okay, main points for progression. So you're going to be washed up on the beach. You're going to be in exile with absolutely nothing. You're going to be half naked. Take the bow, walk up to the town, kill the boss before, get Galvanic Arrow from the quest reward once in town. Link Galvanic Arrow to momentum support, which is what's going to be given during the, you know, the training, like the first part. Use the burning arrow that you got for a single target. At level 4, use Mirage Archer as the main support skill for Galvanic Arrow. If you have the link, then use Momentum, or, you know, add it cold once you have. Use Sniper's Mark at for a single target. So when there's big monsters, you use Sniper's Mark on them. It's a very good DPS boost, but on normal monsters, it's not worth it. Use War Banner at level 4. Use Dash as your movement skill for now. And use Shrapnel Ballista at level 4 for single target and pack control. So because we're going to be, you know, close range with Galvanic, and also we won't be dealing a lot of damage, so our, you know, packs won't be killed easily, what I do suggest is actually like run next to the pack so all the monsters are following you, then drop your Shrapnel Ballistas. The monsters will actually aggro on them. Shrapnel will be able to deal damage, and then you'll be able to comfortably, you know, sit and just pick off the monsters and kill them. Then at level 12, swap the Rain of Arrows and use the Ballista Totem support. Link Ballista Totem support to your Rain of Arrows, so you basically have 2 Rain of Arrows. For your movement skill, I suggest Blink Arrow and Frost Blink. I find them to be the best combo because Blink Arrow can teleport you pretty much everywhere on your screen, and Frost Blink is a it's an instant skill, so you don't have any animation. The best links are going to be Rain of Arrow, Mirage Archer, and Added Cold if you can. And then for your totems, I suggest Ballista Totem Support, Rain of Arrow, or Added Cold. If you have a buddy who is doing, you know, the top left side of the tree, so he's doing like a Templar, or he's doing a Witch, you can ask for the Clarity Gem, which is going to help for mana issues because it gives you mana regen. Once you have access to Auras and Heralds, use that, and you use Trinity, and use them to be able to have both types of elemental damage, whether it's fire cold, fire lightning, lightning cold, lightning fire, like, or fire, like whichever, right? But once you get to Auras and Heralds, use Trinity and, you know, work your build a bit to be able to use Trinity at full capacity. If your bow has added flat cold, for example, then go for a fire or lightning support gem or as aura, right? So just make sure, as I explained in the Trinity part, to have that up at all times. Also, make sure that your accuracy is always higher than your HP with Precise Technique, because at that point you will have Precise Technique in your tree. Now, Trinity could still be used without the full proc. If you have too much difficulty or your gems are like too problematic, you can still use Trinity as a support gem, and it will only proc 2/3 of the Trinity, and it's still going to be very powerful. But try to get it corrected as soon as possible. At level 28, you could use Artillery Ballista for a huge DPS single target increase, or if you have enough sockets, you can go then for the Manaforged swap at the same level, because you're going to be using Blast Rain, and Blast Rain is a level 28 skill as well. However, I think the best and smoothest time to swap to Manaforged is actually going to be Act 6, but then it's going to be down to your personal preference, because at Act 6, you have enough links, you have enough damage, you can use Manaforged, Life Tap, all of that good stuff. Now, if you do want to go for the Manaforged, I suggest going Blast Rain, Manaforged, Life Tap, and if you have another link, then go for Storm Rain. Once done with the second lab, go for Lightning Arrow, Returning Projectile, Mirage Archer, and Pierce. If you have a blue socket, take out Mirage Archer and use Trinity. If you have a red socket, use Inspiration for mana issues. You can then use Barrage support for single bosses, but I think with the Manaforged and with the totems, you do not need to use Barrage support. I actually hate that skill, well, that supporting gem. So yeah, just don't. But if you're going to go for Ubers, if you're trying to rush your, not Uber, sorry, if you're trying to rush your Exarch and your Eater, then obviously go for Barrage because like they only have one monster. But when you're doing bosses in the axe and in maps, there's also like smaller monsters on the side, right? So being able to, you know, having good clear even if you're doing bosses, it's going to be helpful, right? After that, it's really important to note that there's so many ways of using support gems, setups, and pretty much all of them work literally. So it's impossible to say which is better, right? So you cannot control the colors, you cannot control the number of sockets you have. So simply try to get the main gems in, and the most important ones, which are going to be, you know, Mirage Archer for your Rain of Arrows and Trinity, and then for your Lightning Arrow, get the returning projectile, and if you can, either Mirage or Trinity. But for the rest, like, you do you, put the gems in, and if you see that your DPS goes up, it's literally the best option, okay? Whatever makes your DPS go up and doesn't break your build, it's the way to go. That's going to be the end of the video. The rest of the information and, you know, more in-depth information is going to be in the POB. There's going to be notes and stuff. I don't know if I'm going to make the POB at the same time as I drop this video. But yeah, everything is going to be updated in the POB. If there is new things coming out, so new information on 3.23, you will see a section in the POB notes which will be updated, saying what's updated and what you should do and what I think about it. All right. So I wish you guys a good league start, and most importantly, have fun.